It is Wednesday. It's the 9th of July. You're watching ARIRANG Korea's only global network. Live from Seoul, I'm Moon Gun-young. Now, packing a major punch, Typhoon Neoguri is bringing 250 km/h winds, which is the equivalent to a Category 5 hurricane in the U.S. and heavy rains to Japan's southern coastline. Now, in Korea, a typhoon warning has been issued for Jeju Island, and officials are advising residents to prepare for heavy rain, strong winds, and high waves. Our Shin Se-min has more on the strongest typhoon yet in the Western Pacific this season.
Typhoon Neoguri is on the move, churning northward toward mainland Japan, bringing heavy rain and winds. In Korea, its effect is currently being felt on the southern island of Jeju, where it's left over 3,000 households without power. Earlier on Wednesday, the Korea Meteorological Administration issued a typhoon warning over the waters, saying the storm will bring torrential rain and high winds. According to the alert, Jeju Island could see up to 30 millimeters of rain per hour, with winds of up to 20 meters per second. The strongest typhoon so far in the 2014 Western Pacific season was at its most powerful when it passed Okinawa on Tuesday. At least 2 people have been killed and more than a dozen injured. Japanese officials have issued the strongest warnings to residents in the typhoon's path. Over 500,000 people on the islands were forced to seek shelter. All domestic flights to and from Okinawa had been canceled until further notice, and over 95,000 households in the region have no power. Neoguri has lost some of its intensity from its original status as a super typhoon, but it still remains intense, packing gusts of more than 250 km/h. The storm is expected to make landfall on Japan's Kyushu Island late Wednesday local time. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
Well, we sure hope that there is no more damage from this, and we hope everyone in its path will come out safe and sound. But let's go over to our Michelle Park at the Weather Center for what the weather has in store for us. Michelle, it certainly doesn't seem like there's a typhoon in the way in the nation's capital, at least, because it's in fact scorching hot here in Seoul.
Well, here in Seoul, a heat wave advisory is in effect due to the influence of the Typhoon Neoguri. That's bringing in a hot air, and it looks like the heat won't cool off anytime soon, giving us a tropical night as well. And the typhoon is moving northwards and getting closer to Korea Peninsula, and it's currently having a huge direct effect on Jeju Island with up to 30 millimeters of rain per hour, and the typhoon warning is also in effect for the South Sea. And besides that, we can expect a hot and humid weather nationwide, which has increased the discomfort index. So today is a good day to spend the day indoors, and for those of you driving, please be careful on the roads. Now going over to our temperature readings, Seoul will top out at 32 this afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will both peak up to 28 degrees. And moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops over to 26, Dokdo hits 28, while Mankungang tops out at 26.
All right, so those of you in the storm's path, do stay out of that, and do try to stay indoors out of the storm's way. Now, meanwhile, in another news, this Wednesday afternoon, more missile launches by North Korea were made this morning, which is just days after the regime proposed an end to all military hostilities across the border. This is the 13th of its kind this year and comes only a week after the reclusive state fired 2 short-range projectiles. ARIRANG News Hwang Sung-hee has this report.
North Korea fired 2 short-range ballistic missiles into the East Sea early Wednesday morning. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said the projectiles, believed to be Scud missiles with a range of 500 kilometers, were launched at around 4 a.m. Korea time from the north's western Hwanghae-do province without prior warning. The missiles fell in international waters. Wednesday's launch marks the 13th launch of projectiles by Pyongyang this year. North Korea had fired 2 short-range projectiles a week ago, just 1 day ahead of Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to South Korea. This latest launch also comes only days after Pyongyang claimed Seoul must shift its confrontational policy toward the north to one that would lead to reconciliation between the 2 Koreas. A South Korean military official who wished to remain anonymous said the latest missile launch could be seen as an armed demonstration by North Korea to show that it can fire missiles anywhere at any time. The South Korean military has heightened its vigilance and beefed up its military readiness against any additional provocations by the North. Hwang Sang-hee, ARIRANG News.
But of course, what is posing a bigger threat to regional security here in Northeast Asia is North Korea's nuclear program. The issue is expected to top the agenda of this year's annual US-China dialogue, which kicked off earlier this morning in Beijing. Our Park Ji-won has the details on this two-day meeting.
The U.S. and China began their sixth meeting of the U.S.-China Strategic and Economic Dialogue in Beijing from this Wednesday. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Treasury Secretary Jacob Lew will discuss a diverse range of issues with their Chinese counterparts, Chinese State Councilor Yang Jiechi and Vice Premier Wang Yang. U.S. State Department spokesperson Jen Psaki says the North Korean nuclear issue is sure to come up during the talks.
But certainly we expect the threat from North Korea, our concerns about North Korea, to be a part of the discussion ongoing on the ground now.
However, the two sides are far apart on issues related to Pyongyang's nuclear program. China, North Korea's only ally, wants to address the issue by moderate persuasion and resuming the long-stalled six-party talks. The U.S. says North Korea first needs to take steps to abide by its past obligations, such as a landmark statement it signed at the six-party talks in September 2005, when Pyongyang agreed to abandon its nuclear program.
How to best work together to put the necessary pressure on North Korea, but the ball remains in their court to take the necessary steps to abide by their international obligations.
A bilateral investment treaty and China's valuation of its currency will also be discussed. The two nations will also exchange views on sensitive issues like territorial disputes in the South China Sea and China's alleged hacking attacks on U.S. companies. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
Well, on to a very different story. The World Cup was out of our focus for the past couple of days, but the real game begins now over in Brazil, with the semifinals having kicked off earlier this morning, Korea time. Well, it was arguably the most shocking result in World Cup history, let alone this year's tournament. Germany completely dismantled the host nation Brazil in Tuesday's semifinals, thrashing them 7-1. Germany will take on either Argentina or the Netherlands in Sunday's final. Our sports correspondent S.J. Lee has the highlights.
With millions of Brazilian fans hoping to see their national team advance to their first World Cup final since the 2002 Korea-Japan World Cup, expectations were high. But with high expectations came an even bigger disappointment as Brazil were thrashed 7-1 by Germany. With star striker Neymar out with an injury, the bigger blow to the Brazilian team was the absence of their captain and defender Thiago Silva, who was suspended due to yellow card accumulation. And with the cornerstone of the Brazilian defense unavailable, Germany scored 5 times in the first 30 minutes. One of the goals during the 30-minute frenzy came from the boot of 36-year-old Miroslav Klose, who broke the all-time World Cup goal record once held by none other than Brazil's Ronaldo by scoring his 16th World Cup goal in the 23rd minute of the match. For Germany, it was a sweet revenge for their 2-0 loss against Brazil in 2002 World Cup final. Germany will now play either Argentina or the Netherlands in the final on Sunday local time, while they have a shot at lifting their first World Cup since 1990 when they won as West Germany. S.J. Lee, ARIRANG News.
When the latest news meets the latest business stories, we give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Business Today with Moon Gon-young. Every weekday, only on ARIRANG.
Now, with Chinese President Xi Jinping's recent visit to Seoul and a slew of economic deals freshly signed, it would be fair to say that the economic relationship between South Korea and China has never been better. Bilateral trade has jumped many folds in recent years, and cooperation is beginning to expand into financial and other new sectors as well. Our Connie Kim reports on the rapidly expanding economic and business relationship.
Chinese company Tencent has begun investing $523 million in Korea's CJ Games, which it says will be completed by the end of this year. The single case of investment far exceeds the total sum of investment by all Chinese companies last year that stood at just over $480 million. The Tencent's move is a departure from a traditional investment pattern by Chinese companies that used to limit their investments in real estate. Last week's agreement between the two countries to let their businessmen settle their bilateral trade in their own currencies will open a new window of opportunities in the financial sector.
The biggest achievement with President Xi Jinping's visit to Seoul was pushing for financial cooperation between the two countries, allowing direct trading between the won and the yuan, and allowing yuan-holding Korean companies to directly invest in China's stock and fund markets will greatly contribute to expanding cooperation in the financial industry.
The agreement between President Park Geun-hye and President Xi last week to make every effort to conclude a free trade agreement this year will further boost rapidly expanding bilateral trade. Korea's two-way trade with China jumped more than 50-fold to $230 billion last year from 1992 when the two nations set up diplomatic ties. That exceeds a combined value of Korea's trade with the U.S. and Japan. Now, once a free trade deal is reached, the leaders of the countries expect their trade value to top $300 billion next year. Experts caution, however, that to keep expanding business ties between the two economies in a complementary way, Korean companies must maintain its technological superiority and improve competitiveness in the service industry. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
The Korean government is speeding up its efforts to diversify oil import channels as the nation is heavily dependent on crude oil from the Middle East. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy said Wednesday that it drastically revised an oil bill so that companies that import oil from non-Middle Eastern countries can benefit more. Now, under this revised bill, companies will be compensated with the extra cost of importing non-Middle Eastern oil like London's Brent crude or African crude for that matter. Currently, about 50% of Korea's crude oil imports come from, or 85% rather, come from the Middle East. After Samsung Electronics posted far from impressive earnings for the second quarter earlier this week, it's pushing to find its next big thing to get back on track. Our Kim Ji-an might have some answers on what that might be.
The future of Samsung Electronics lies in the balance, and that was never more true than now. One after another, securities firms are lowering their projections for Samsung's third quarter after the company reported lower than expected earnings for the previous quarter. At least 26 securities firms in Seoul already say the smartphone maker will record an average of $8.5 billion in operating profit in the third quarter, which is a drop of more than 15% from last year's projections for the same period. Samsung's slowdown in the second quarter, which industry insiders are referring to as an earnings shock, is widely seen as a result of a slowdown resonating from a smartphone market that's become saturated and is not expected to pick up anytime soon. In response, Samsung is eyeing its next growth engine. One of these is the Internet of Things, where various smart devices are connected through the Internet using sensors on gadgets. As a manufacturer of electronic devices, Samsung does have a strength in this field. The company launched its smart home in April, which connects smart sensors in home appliances. The service makes home automation easy with a single app that connects and controls many home appliances, from TVs and mobile devices to internet-connected burglar alarms and light switches. Samsung is also working to promote its health and fitness gadgets. The Samsung Strategy and Innovation Center in Silicon Valley in the United States presented a service in May called Sami, a cloud platform that saves and analyzes collected data from the company's wearable devices, the Samsung Gear and the Gear Fit. Kim Ji-an, ARIRANG News.
And it's not only Samsung Electronics that posted disappointing second quarter earnings. The nation's top 20 conglomerates by market capitalization are also expected to follow suit, falling roughly 7%. Here's our Kim Min-ji.
Korea's top 20 conglomerates by market capitalization are expected to turn in disappointing scorecards for the second quarter. According to market researcher Evan Guide, the combined operating profit of the top 20 companies is expected to amount to about 18 trillion won, or roughly $17.8 billion, which is down 7.1% from last year. Their combined sales are also expected to fall about 1% to sit at just over $200 billion. The slip has come on the back of a stronger won, which has hit export-reliant firms the hardest. Automobile companies' profits will also be affected. The operating profit for Hyundai Motor, the second largest, is expected to come to roughly $2.3 billion, down 6.7% from last year. During the same period, Kia Motors is also likely to see a drop of almost 21%. The automobile industry says that sales will be similar to last year, driven by the sales of new cars, but operating profits will dip due to the stronger won and marketing expenses related to the Brazil World Cup. POSCO, LG Display, and Hyundai Heavy Industries are also expected to see a decline. On the flip side, firms in the financial and IT sectors will likely turn in strong report cards, with firms centered around domestic consumption set to benefit from the strong won. Samsung C&T is expected to see a jump of about 59%, Naver 32%, and LG Electronics 10.3%. LG's mobile communications division is also likely to turn a profit in the second quarter on strong sales of its new G3 smartphone, and that's expected to have a positive effect on the performance cards of affiliates that supply parts to LG and tech giant Samsung Electronics. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
While on the brighter side, Korea's exports of information and communication technology products hit a record high in the first 6 months of this year on robust outbound shipments of semiconductors and mobile phones. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy said Wednesday that exports of ICT products came to roughly $84 billion in the first half of the year. This is up more than 3% from the same period a year ago. The record performance came despite the strength of the local currency and an overall slump in the global ICT market. Imports of ICT products also rose almost 7.5% to $42 billion in the first half of the year. Now, Samsung Electronics forecast a 25% drop in profit for the second quarter due to a slowdown in the smartphone market and a strong Korean currency. It expects to make an operating profit of roughly $7.1 billion in the April to June period. This is down from 9.5 trillion won, about $9 billion a year ago. And the profit has fallen. The quarterly profit has fallen for 3 straight quarters. Dr. Kim Byung-ju joins me live for an in-depth look. Dr. Kim, it's probably not an overstatement that Samsung is one of the big pillars of the Korean economy, so it's certainly not welcome news to hear that Samsung's latest quarterly performance was bad.
Right.
So
indeed.
how serious is that?
Even in answering the question of how serious the overall situation is, I think we need more time because there are all different analysts saying different things. But let's check the numbers first. It has been mentioned this is the first time that Samsung Electronics has made operating profit that is less than 8 trillion Korean wons. That's roughly about $8 billion there. As you can see on the screen, 7.2 is what you're seeing on operating profit there, and that is, as you mentioned, close to 25% drop from the from a year ago. And if we compare from the previous quarter, which is the first quarter, that's drop of about 15.2%. So indeed, this is pretty big. Of course, those people who are saying this is not that serious are arguing that actually the performance of Samsung leading up to the first quarter have been so fantastic the overall benchmarking point itself is a little bit biased here. So they're saying, let's chill off here. Let's not get too disappointed. We knew this kind of competition would be coming along anyway, so don't get panicked, and let's wait and see and look further down the road. So that dispute or disagreement between the pessimists on one hand and the optimists on the other, I think we need more time to sort them out.
Well, I suppose the key questions here are, one, how serious this latest the disappointment in the smartphone really is, the market overall, and two, how long this disappointing, I suppose, situation will continue to be.
Well, those are $2 million questions, not one but two there. The thing is, overall, what we know is Samsung has been actually making a lot of pretty sexy profits, if you will, during the second quarter, because the first quarter they introduced a new line of products. This year what they introduced was Galaxy S5, and they were expecting, hoping that until September, which is usually the case every year, Samsung introduces their new product during the first quarter, and then the third quarter, September, Apple introduces their own new line of product. And during that time, second quarter is the golden time for Samsung to make lots of profits. But the thing is, this time Galaxy S5 was a little bit of disappointment because of the fact that United States market and the European market, their smartphone markets are saturated, so they can expect big jump in terms of their sales. While other than the markets for this kind of really fancy frontline, top of the line products, meaning that the developing markets and Chinese markets, where Samsung was selling like mid-level or lower cost, lower priced products, where they couldn't do very well. So indeed, this is, according to the pessimists, a structural problem. But Samsung Electronics is very adamant, saying this is not structural, this is temporary. We were spending a lot of money to market those slightly older phones to get rid of them from the inventory this time. So they said we spent a little bit on the marketing side. That's why the numbers are bad. I think the majority seems to be on the structuralist argument at this point, but I think we need more time on that as well.
Right. When we hear of this news, we cannot but think about what happened to Apple and Nokia.
Right.
Could we go over the similarities and perhaps the differences as well between the two cases?
My personal view is Nokia might be already an old game where the current rules may not apply, because the way I see it, Nokia was before the smartphone times.
Right.
So there was more commodity, closer to commodity, where you produce like cheaper goods and sell at a better price. That's better. But Apple's case, I think this has a close bearing here, because this is where Apple used to be is the position where Samsung now seems to be positioning itself, which is kind of like pioneer, a creator of new markets, a creator of new products. Apple, under Steve Jobs, what they were doing was they just totally introduced a new market called the smartphone in a way, and a new market called, the iPad and that kind of tablet PC markets,
right? So innovation there.
Exactly, and what Samsung has to do now is to do exactly the same. Create a new kind of industry or business here. That's what they have to do, and that's not what they're used to doing at this point. So that's where they face fundamental dilemma. And now what they have in their hands are like smartphone markets where they're being sandwiched by loyal phones of Apple on one hand, and on the other hand, those people who are looking for lower priced products in the developing market, where China is such a big one, and the tablet PC market is not growing, so they really need to create a new one, and that's a big challenge.
Right. I think many have consensus here that Apple is known for being the innovator, and Samsung being the more of a developer. So follower, but it makes the product that's there more developed and more advanced.
Right.
So Samsung needs to change that, in your view.
Exactly. They have to become an innovator.
Right. So what are we going to see ahead as Samsung works to seek its upswing again?
Let's talk about that idea of having to become an innovator for this year, for instance. They have a lineup of products coming up for this year. For tablet PCs, Galaxy Tab S is coming up, and Gear Live is coming up as a wearable. that's a new market that's not forming firmly yet. We need more time on that one. And then Galaxy Note 4 is new smartphone that's coming up. So whether that lineup, those products that are coming up could actually place Samsung at a creator of new market position or not would be a big question that a lot of eyes will be watching. But for now, it's not going to be like a leap forward there. So Samsung is talking about further broadening their scope of products that could actually have a better appeal, stronger appeal in the developing market for one, and also continue to raise its brand value even in developing markets by introducing apps that are specifically designed, for example, China market or Islam world market and different areas. So they want to continue to charge a little bit of higher price and create a consumer loyalty. Very risky strategy, but let's wait and see whether those kind of strategies will pay off.
Well, hopefully they will, because Samsung is, of course, a big pillar in the Korean economy. All right, Dr. Kim Myung-ju, thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
And that is your business today on this Wednesday. Thank you for watching, and do join us again at 6 p.m. Korea time on Early Dish Net 6.